I am Coco, 32 years old, a freelance graphic designer based in Chicago. After years of dedication, I finally built my own successful design business. But the journey was far from smooth, especially when it came to my family. All my life, I lived in my brother Jackson's shadow. Nothing I did ever seemed good enough. Then, last month, I received a phone call from my parents asking for additional financial support. When I questioned them, my father sneered, "You will never be as good as your brother." That comparison was the final straw. If you have ever experienced family comparisons, leave a comment below about where you are watching from. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and let me know if you have ever been compared to a sibling. Growing up in a middle-class suburb of Minneapolis, my childhood looked picture perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial house with the white picket fence, family barbecues in summer, and ski trips in winter painted an idyllic American family portrait. But inside those walls, I was constantly reminded that I was the lesser child, the disappointment who could never measure up to my brilliant older brother. Jackson was 5 years older than me, and in my parents' eyes, he was perfection personified. His report cards were filled with straight A's. His bedroom shelves sagged under the weight of trophies from swimming, debate team, and chess competitions. Teachers praised his intelligence, coaches admired his discipline, and neighbors commented on his politeness. He was the golden child, and I was perpetually in his shadow. "Why can't you be more like Jackson?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. When I brought home a B+ in math, my father would sigh and remind me, "Jackson never got anything less than an A in mathematics." When I struggled with science projects, my mother would shake her head and say, "Your brother won the state science fair when he was even younger than you." I tried everything to earn their approval. I learned to play piano, hoping my musical talent would impress them. After my recital, my mother remarked, "Jackson mastered Chopin by your age," completely dismissing the Mozart piece I had practiced for months. I joined the art club and discovered a natural talent for visual arts. My watercolor painting won first place in a school competition, but my parents barely glanced at it when I proudly brought it home. "Art is a nice hobby, Coco, but it won't get you anywhere in life," my father said dismissively. "Jackson is taking advanced placement classes that will set him up for success." The painting ended up in my closet instead of on our living room wall, where Jackson's debate team certificates were prominently displayed. Even our extended family perpetuated the comparisons. At Thanksgiving dinners, relatives would first ask Jackson about his academic achievements and athletic victories, then turn to me with that slightly pitying look. "And what about you, Coco? Still drawing those little pictures?" they would ask, their tone making it clear they saw my artistic pursuits as childish compared to Jackson's serious accomplishments. I became invisible in my own home. At dinner, the conversation revolved around Jackson's latest achievement or his bright future. When I tried to share something about my day or a small victory, the topic quickly shifted back to my brother. I learned to eat quietly and excuse myself early, retreating to my bedroom where I could escape into my sketchbooks and create worlds where I was valued for being me. By high school, I had developed a protective shell. I stopped trying to compete with Jackson because I knew I would never win in their eyes. Instead, I focused on finding my own path. I took every art and design class available, stayed late after school to use the art room, and built a portfolio of work I was genuinely proud of. My art teacher, Mrs. Thornton, became my biggest supporter, seeing potential in me that my family never acknowledged. "You have a unique perspective, Coco," she told me one afternoon as I worked on a digital design project. "Your brother may excel in traditional academics, but you have a gift that is just as valuable. Never forget that." Her words were a lifeline, a rare validation I clung to during those difficult years. The contrast in how my parents treated us was never more apparent than during our high school graduations. When Jackson graduated, my parents threw an extravagant party. They invited extended family, neighbors, and even his teachers. They rented a party tent for our backyard, hired caterers, and my father gave a 20-minute speech praising Jackson's accomplishments and bright future at an Ivy League university. 4 years later, when it was my turn to graduate, we went to a restaurant for a quick dinner. No party, no guests, no speech. My mother did take a few photos, but she seemed more interested in discussing Jackson's recent internship at a prestigious financial firm than celebrating my milestone. When I mentioned my acceptance to the Art Institute of Chicago with a partial scholarship, my father frowned. "Are you sure about this art school thing, Coco? It's not too late to apply to a real university. Something with better career prospects." My mother, attempting to be supportive in her own way, added, "Honey, we just want you to be able to support yourself. This art thing seems so uncertain." What they really meant was, "We want you to be just like Jackson." But by then, I knew that would never happen. And deep down, despite the hurt, I was starting to realize that maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. Leaving for college was like taking my first real breath after years of suffocation. The Art Institute of Chicago was over 400 miles from Minneapolis, and that distance felt like both a physical and emotional liberation. I remember the day my parents dropped me off at my dorm. The contrast between my send-off and Jackson's was stark. For him, they had taken a week off work, helped him settle in, met his roommate's family, and treated everyone to an expensive dinner. For me, they drove down on a Saturday, unloaded my few belongings, and were back on the road by mid-afternoon, citing the need to return to work on Monday. Their disappointment in my choice was palpable. "Graphic design?" my father scoffed when I announced my major. "What kind of stable career will that lead to? Jackson studied economics and finance. Those are fields with real prospects." My mother, attempting to be supportive in her own way, added, "Honey, we just want you to be able to support yourself. This art thing seems so uncertain." What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for independence for years. Unlike Jackson, whose entire education was funded by my parents, I knew I would largely be on my own. The partial scholarship covered about half my tuition, but everything else was up to me. Within a week of arriving in Chicago, I had secured 2 part-time jobs: morning shifts at a coffee shop near campus and weekend work at a local print shop where I could also learn practical skills related to my field. My schedule was grueling. I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning to get to the coffee shop by 5, work until 9, then rush to classes until late afternoon. 3 evenings a week, I worked on freelance design projects I found through campus bulletin boards and online forums. Weekends were spent at the print shop learning about paper stocks, binding techniques, and industrial printers from the owner, an old-school graphic designer named Frank, who took me under his wing. "You've got a good eye, kid," he would tell me as I helped design business cards and brochures for local businesses. "Better than half the design school graduates I've seen come through here." Despite the exhaustion, for the first time in my life, I felt valued for my own talents. My art teacher, Lydia, a photography major from Seattle, was the first person who ever looked at my work with genuine admiration, instead of comparison. "Coco, this is amazing," she exclaimed when she saw the poster I designed for the Student Film Festival. "You have such a distinctive style. I've never seen anyone approach composition like you." Her praise felt foreign to me. I was so used to being found wanting that I hardly knew how to respond to sincere admiration. But slowly, surrounded by people who appreciated creativity and original thinking, I began to rebuild my shattered self-confidence. Professor Gabriel Martinez was particularly influential. In my second year, he pulled me aside after his advanced typography class. "Miss Walker, I've been teaching for 20 years, and I rarely see the kind of intuitive understanding of visual hierarchy that you possess. Have you considered applying for the summer internship at Meridian Design?" I hadn't, assuming such prestigious opportunities were for students more talented than me. But with his encouragement, I applied, and, to my surprise, I was accepted. That summer internship led to connections that later proved invaluable to my career.
Meanwhile, my phone calls home became increasingly infrequent. Each conversation followed the same pattern: brief inquiries about my studies, followed by lengthy updates about Jackson's flourishing career at Goldman Sachs. He had been promoted. He had moved to a luxury apartment. He was dating the daughter of a partner at the firm. "Your brother just got a performance bonus. That's probably more than you'll make in your first year after graduation," my father said during one call, not even trying to hide the comparison. I began to dread those conversations, each one reinforcing that no matter what I achieved, it would never measure up to Jackson's accomplishments in their eyes. So I called less and less, throwing myself into building my portfolio and network instead. By my senior year, I had built an impressive body of work, won several student design competitions, and secured a job offer from.
I began sending $500 every month, a significant portion of my entry-level salary. During one of our calls, I cautiously asked if Jackson was also helping with the expenses. There was an uncomfortable pause before my mother answered, "Your brother's at a critical point in his career right now. He has his mortgage payments, country club membership, and he's saving for a partnership buy-in at his firm. He has a lot of financial commitments." The implication was clear. Jackson's money was for his future, while mine was expected to support our parents. Despite earning significantly more than me, he was somehow exempt from financial responsibility toward the family. Even more painful was that despite my sacrifices, the comparisons never stopped. During one visit home, as I handed my mother an envelope with extra cash I had earned from a freelance project, she sighed wistfully. "Jackson just bought a vacation property in Aspen. Can you imagine? He said we can use it anytime. He's always been so thoughtful." I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out the irony of praising his generosity with a vacation home while I was the one actually keeping their lights on. Instead, I smiled tightly and changed the subject. To meet my growing financial obligations, I began taking on freelance projects during evenings and weekends. My tiny apartment became even more cramped as I accumulated equipment needed for professional design work. My social life dwindled to nearly nothing as I juggled my day job and side hustles. Some weeks I worked 70 hours or more, fueled by cheap coffee and determination. The strain began to show. I developed chronic migraines from the long hours staring at screens. Dark circles became a permanent feature under my eyes. Friends stopped inviting me out, knowing I would decline due to deadlines or exhaustion. But I kept going, sending that monthly payment home without fail, even when it meant postponing my own dream of starting a design studio. About 3 years into this arrangement, I received an elegant cream-colored envelope in the mail. It was an invitation to Jackson's wedding to Sophia, the daughter of a senior partner at his firm. The event would be held at an exclusive resort in Napa Valley, California. At the bottom of the invitation, in small print, were the words, "Black tie required." Just attending would cost me nearly $2,000 between airfare, hotel, attire, and a gift, money I didn't have to spare. But I knew that not attending my only brother's wedding would create a family rift I wasn't prepared to deal with. So I picked up yet another freelance project, designing a catalog for a furniture company. Working through multiple weekends to earn the extra money, I maxed out my credit card for a plane ticket and found the least expensive black dress that could pass for formal wear at a high-end wedding. The weekend was a showcase of wealth and privilege: crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Throughout the event, my parents beamed with pride at Jackson, the successful son who had made it. They introduced me to their friends as "our daughter. She does something with computers and art." Unable to even correctly describe my profession. At the reception, I overheard my father talking to his brother, my Uncle Robert. "Jackson's really secured his future with this marriage. The connections alone are worth their weight in gold. And look at this venue, the people here. He moves in important circles now." Uncle Robert nodded appreciatively, then glanced in my direction. "And what about Coco? Is she doing well for herself too?" My father's response was a dismissive wave. "She's still figuring things out. You know how artists are, always struggling. But we're hopeful she'll eventually find something more stable."
I had been sending them money for 3 years at that point, often at the expense of my own financial security. Yet in their eyes, I was still the directionless child, while Jackson, who contributed nothing, was the model of success. That night in my hotel room, I cried for the first time in years. Not just because of their words, but because I realized I was trapped in a cycle of seeking approval that would never come. No matter what I did, no matter how much I gave, I would always be second best. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to stop sending money. They were my parents, and they needed help. So I returned to Chicago, back to my grueling schedule and monthly transfers, still hoping that someday they would see my value, even if it didn't match their expectations. As the years passed, my career began to gain momentum. The long hours and relentless networking gradually paid off, and my reputation in Chicago's design community grew. By my 5th year in the industry, I had moved from Horizon Design to a more prestigious firm, earning a higher salary and working with national brands. My portfolio expanded to include award-winning campaigns for a popular athleisure brand, a complete rebranding for a chain of organic grocery stores, and digital marketing materials for a major airline. Design blogs featured my work, and I was invited to speak at several industry conferences about my approach to blending traditional graphic design principles with digital experiences. At 29, I finally took the leap and launched my own studio, Prism Design. It was a terrifying but exhilarating move. I rented a small office in a converted warehouse in Chicago's West Loop, invested in professional-grade equipment, and hired a part-time assistant to handle administrative tasks. The first few months were nerve-wracking as I wondered if I had made a catastrophic mistake. But gradually, clients followed me from my previous firm, and new ones came through referrals. Through all this professional growth, I continued sending money home every month without fail. It had been 8 years since I began supporting my parents financially, and the amount had gradually increased from $500 to $800 as their needs grew and my income increased. I never missed a payment even when I'd barely make rent when I first started my business and wasn't sure I could cover rent. What became increasingly strange was that my parents rarely acknowledged these contributions. Our phone conversations, now down to once every few weeks, revolved almost exclusively about Jackson's latest achievements. He had been promoted to senior vice president. He and Sophia had purchased a second home in the Hamptons. They were expecting their first child and had already secured a spot at an exclusive preschool with a waitlist longer than my arm. Jackson is taking us to Europe this summer, my mother announced during one call. 2 weeks in France and Italy. He insists on flying us business class. Isn't that generous? I swallowed the bitter retort that rose to my lips. Jackson could afford such grand gestures precisely because he wasn't supporting them month to month. My consistent contributions enabled their everyday life, while his occasional lavish gifts earned him endless praise. When I did try to share news about my own life, the response was lukewarm at best. After winning a prestigious industry award, I excitedly called to tell them. "That's nice, honey," my mother said distractedly. "Oh, before I forget, did you see the photos Jackson sent of their new vacation home? 4,500 square feet, right on the beach. The virtual tour is absolutely stunning." My achievements evaporated in the glow of Jackson's success. I began to share less and less about my life, knowing it would only lead to disappointment. Our relationship became increasingly transactional, centered around my monthly financial support rather than genuine connection. Then, during a particularly difficult period when several major client projects overlapped, I missed their calls for nearly 3 weeks. When I finally had a moment to breathe and called back, my father answered with unusual coldness. "Well, look who finally remembered she has parents." I apologized and explained about my workload, but he seemed uninterested. There was an odd tension in his voice that I couldn't quite place. When I asked if everything was okay, he hesitated before responding. "Everything's fine. Your mother wants to talk to you." Our conversation was strained with none of the usual updates about Jackson. Instead, they asked pointed questions about my business, whether it was doing well, if I was financially stable. At the time, I attributed their sudden interest in my career to genuine concern. perhaps even a belated recognition of my hard work. How wrong I was. A month later, I decided to surprise them with a visit. I had a potential client meeting in Minneapolis and arranged to stay an extra day to see my parents. I hadn't been home in over a year, and despite our complicated relationship, I missed them. I didn't tell them I was coming, thinking it would be a nice surprise. When I pulled into their driveway on a Thursday afternoon, I noticed an unfamiliar luxury SUV parked in front of the garage. Perhaps they had visitors. I rang the doorbell, gift bag in hand, containing an expensive bottle of scotch for my father and a silk scarf for my mother. My mother opened the door, her face registering shock rather than pleasure. "Coco, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, I heard a familiar voice from inside the house. "Mom, who is it?" Jackson stepped into view behind her, wearing casual clothes and holding a coffee mug as if he lived there, which, as I would soon discover, he did. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with unspoken tension as we all sat down. My mother nervously offered coffee and snacks, while my father seemed unable to meet my eyes. Jackson, normally confident to the point of arrogance, was uncharacteristically quiet. "I had no idea you were in town, Jackson," I said, breaking the silence. "Are you and Sophia visiting for the weekend?" The uncomfortable glances exchanged between them told me something was very wrong. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Your brother has been staying with us for a while, just until he gets back on his feet." Back on his feet? The golden child, who supposedly had a VP position and multiple homes, needed to get back on his feet? It made no sense. What happened?
For 8 years. Are you seriously claiming you never received any of it? Another uncomfortable silence followed. I could hear my parents whispering to each other, their confusion sounding genuine. Finally, my father spoke. "Coco, we never received any regular payments from you. There was that one time after my surgery, but nothing monthly like you're describing." My stomach turned as a terrible suspicion began to form. Who handles your banking? Who has access to your accounts? The silence that followed was answer enough. Jackson. It had always been Jackson. "I need to go," I said abruptly. "I'll call you back." As soon as I hung up, I pulled up my banking records on my computer. There they were, dozens upon dozens of transfers to what I believed was my parents' joint account. But now, with growing horror, I realized it must have been controlled by my brother. For 8 years, I had been sending money not to support my parents, but directly into Jackson's pockets. The golden child, the so-called successful son, had been stealing from me all along. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour, staring at the evidence on my screen. Then, with shaking hands, I began to gather all the documentation. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The realization that my parents had never received my money left me reeling. I took 2 days off work, something I rarely did, just to process everything and plan my next steps. My first move was compiling evidence. I printed out 8 years of bank statements, highlighting each transfer. I organized them chronologically in a binder, creating a paper trail of Jackson's deception. The account I had been sending money to was indeed in my parents' names, but further digging revealed it was a joint account with Jackson listed as an authorized user. That explained how he had been able to siphon the funds without my parents knowing, but I needed more than just suspicion. I needed irrefutable proof. On the recommendation of a client who was an attorney, I hired Trevo Miles, a private investigator specializing in financial fraud. He was expensive, but I needed clarity and evidence that couldn't be denied. "This kind of family financial fraud is more common than you might think," Trevor told me during our consultation, "especially when one family member is seen as more financially successful or responsible than the others." Over the next 3 weeks, Trevor traced the movement of the funds. What he uncovered was both shocking and infuriating. Within days of each deposit, Jackson would transfer the money to his personal account. Sometimes he forged checks with my father's signature. Other times he made direct electronic transfers. He had been intercepting my financial support for years, using it to prop up the illusion of success even after he lost his job. Based on what I've gathered, he's taken about $75,000 from you over 8 years, Trevor explained, showing me his findings. And I've confirmed your parents never saw a penny of it. The number staggered me. $75,000 that could have gone towards student loans, a down payment on a home, or reinvestment into my business. Instead, it had funded Jackson's lifestyle and later supported him through his unemployment, all while he kept up the fiction of being generous and successful. Armed with Trevor's report and my documentation, I booked a flight to Minneapolis. This confrontation needed to happen face to face. I called my parents, telling them I was coming to discuss urgent family matters. I didn't mention Jackson directly, but asked them to make sure he was present. The 2-hour flight was the longest of my life. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd present the evidence, and tried to brace for every possible reaction. Would they believe me, defend Jackson, dismiss the evidence? When I arrived, everyone was there. My mother had prepared coffee and pastries as though this were just another family gathering. Jackson sat in the living room, looking nervous but composed. My father appeared confused about the purpose of the sudden meeting. I declined refreshments and went straight to the point. I opened my binder and placed it on the coffee table. For the past 8 years, I've been sending money every month to support you and Dad, I said, looking directly at my mother. Every single month, without fail. The money went into what I believed was your joint account. My mother shook her head. Coco, we've been through this. We never received any regular payments from you. You're right, Mom, I replied. You never did, because Jackson has been taking it all. Jackson immediately protested, his face flushed with anger. That's ridiculous. How dare you come here and accuse me like that? My father placed a hand on Jackson's arm to calm him, then turned to me with a stern expression. Coco, this is a very serious allegation. Do you have any proof? I have all the proof we need, I said calmly, opening the binder. Here are bank statements showing every transfer, over 8 years. Records showing those funds moving into Jackson's personal account, usually within days. And these, I pulled out a folder containing copies of checks forged with my father's signature, alongside authentic samples of his handwriting and Jackson's for comparison. Trevor had been meticulous. I also have statements from your bank confirming none of these transfers ever appeared in your actual expenses. The money never paid for Dad's medication or household repairs. It all went directly to Jackson. The room fell silent as my parents examined the evidence. My mother's hands trembled as she held the forged checks. My father grew pale as he flipped through page after page of statements. Jackson's defiance withered under the weight of the proof. His denials grew weaker, then shifted to excuses. I was going to pay it back, he insisted. It was just temporary until I got back on my feet. 8 years is not temporary, I cut in. And for most of that time, you weren't struggling. You were employed at Goldman Sachs, making more than enough to support yourself. You took my money because you could, because you felt entitled to it. My father looked up, his face stricken with disbelief and dawning horror. Jackson, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal from your sister all these years. Jackson couldn't meet his eyes. His silence was confirmation enough. My mother began to cry softly, at first, but then with heavy, racking sobs. How could you do this to your sister? To us? The golden child's facade had finally crumbled. Jackson sat with his head in his hands, unable to offer a defense. I trusted you, my father said, his voice breaking. We all trusted you. You handled our finances, our accounts, everything. We believed in you. For the first time, I saw my father look at Jackson with something other than pride. Now there was only betrayal. All those times you told us Coco never helped, my mother whispered. All those times you said she was too busy with her career to care about family. You were lying to us about our own daughter. Jackson stayed silent, crushed under the truth. I felt no triumph, only profound sadness.
This wasn't just about the money, though the loss was enormous. It was about years of broken trust, missed opportunities for connection, and a false narrative that had shaped our family. "There's more," I said quietly. "The trips you thought Jackson paid for, the gifts, the dinners, all those grand gestures you praised him for, those were funded with my money too." My father stood up and walked to the window, his back turned. His shoulders shook, and I realized with shock that he was crying. I had never seen my father cry before. "All these years," he said, his voice low, "we thought you didn't care, Coco, that you were too caught up in your own life to think about us. And all this time, you were the one supporting us, and we never even knew it." My mother reached across the coffee table, taking my hand. "Can you ever forgive us for not seeing the truth? For all the comparisons? For making you feel less than?" The question caught me off guard. I had expected denial, defense of Jackson, or resistance to the truth. I hadn't expected remorse or a plea for forgiveness. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's not just about the money, though the loss is enormous. It's about a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough, that my achievements didn't matter, that I'd never measure up. The money is just one piece of a much bigger pattern." Jackson finally raised his tear-streaked face. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. "I started small. After your first payment, I was overextended on credit cards. I thought I'd borrow a little and pay it back, but then it became easy to take more. Then it became a habit. And then you couldn't maintain the lie of success without it," I finished for him. He nodded miserably. "The more I took, the more I had to lie, and the more I lied, the more I needed to keep taking. It was a cycle I couldn't break." "What happens now?" my mother asked, looking between us. It was the same question I had asked myself on the flight. What did I want? Revenge? Repayment? Justice? The answer wasn't simple. "First, Jackson needs to acknowledge everything in writing," I said firmly. "The total amount, how it was taken, over what period. Trevor has prepared a document outlining it. Jackson, you need to sign it." He nodded, offering no protest. "And I'll sign whatever you need," Jackson said quietly, "and I'll find a way to pay back every cent I can, no matter how long it takes. Third," I said, turning to my parents, "we need to talk about moving forward as a family, about rebuilding trust, about changing how we relate to each other. That will be the hardest part." My father turned from the window, facing me, the proud, judgmental man that had shaped so much of my.
But for the first time, I felt like I was facing my family on equal terms, no longer the lesser child struggling to measure up. The aftermath of that confrontation was both painful and transformative. In the days that followed, my parents consulted their attorney and made a difficult decision. They filed a police report against Jackson. It was not something I had asked for or even expected, but they felt it was necessary to hold him accountable. "It's not just about what he did to you," my father explained when he called to tell me. "It's about what he did to all of us. The lies, the manipulation. We can't pretend it didn't happen or handle it just within the family. There have to be consequences." Jackson was charged with fraud and forgery. Because of the substantial amount involved and the length of his deception, these were serious charges. Ultimately, he accepted a plea deal that included restitution, probation, and community service, avoiding jail time but leaving a permanent record of his actions. The legal proceedings were just one aspect of the fallout. Far more complicated was the emotional reckoning that followed. My parents and I began the slow, often awkward process of rebuilding our relationship from the ground up. It started with weekly phone calls that were stilted and uncomfortable, both sides unsure how to relate to each other without the false narrative that had shaped us for so long. 3 months after the confrontation, my parents suggested therapy, both individual and family sessions. I was surprised by their willingness to examine their own behavior and biases, a level of self-reflection I had never seen from them before. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," my mother said during one of our early sessions with Dr. Laura Hoffman, a family therapist in Minneapolis,
about why we always favored Jackson, why we couldn't see Coco's value on her own terms. My father, who had always been emotionally reserved, visibly struggled in these conversations. "I think I saw in Jackson what I wanted to be," he admitted during one particularly intense session. "The traditional success, the financial world, the status. And in Coco, I saw a path I didn't understand and therefore couldn't value. That was my failure, not hers." For my part, I had to confront my own role in our dysfunctional family system, how I had continued to seek their approval even as an adult, how I had enabled Jackson's deception by never directly confirming with my parents that they were receiving my support. "You were conditioned from childhood to believe your worth was less," Dr. Hoffman explained to me. "Breaking that conditioning is hard work, and it's work all of you need to do, not just you alone." As for Jackson, his path was perhaps the most difficult. After the legal proceedings concluded, he moved to Seattle for a fresh start, taking a job at a much smaller financial firm with a significant pay cut. Our relationship was the slowest to heal, understandably so. We began with occasional emails, then moved to monthly phone calls that were careful and cordial, though lacking the ease of true forgiveness. "I am in therapy too," he told me during one call about a year later, "trying to understand why I did what I did. The therapist thinks I was terrified of losing my position as the favorite child, that I created this elaborate fiction because I couldn't bear to be seen as a failure." "And what do you think?" I asked. There was a long pause before he answered. "I think I was jealous of you," he said finally, "of your authenticity, your passion for your work, the fact that you built something real while I was just playing a role I thought I was supposed to play. It's no excuse for what I did, but that's what I'm working through." It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. A small step towards something that might one day resemble a genuine sibling relationship. Meanwhile, my design business flourished. The time and energy I had once devoted to earning my family's approval was now directed into creative work and meaningful relationships. I expanded Prism Design, hired 3 full-time designers, and moved into a larger studio. My client list grew to include national brands, and I was featured in several industry publications. More importantly, I built a support network of friends who valued me for exactly who I was. Lydia, my college roommate, moved to Chicago after a divorce, and our friendship became deeper and more authentic than ever. I began dating Michael, a kind and thoughtful architect who appreciated my creative perspective and encouraged my ambitions. 2 years after the confrontation, I felt ready to take a significant step in my healing journey. I invited my parents to Chicago to see my studio, meet my team, and witness the world I had built for myself. It was the first time they had ever visited me in my professional environment. "This is incredible, Coco," my father said as he looked around at the awards on the walls, the designs in the portfolio area, and the busy creative space filled with talented people who respected me as their leader. His voice carried genuine awe, free from comparisons or qualifications. My mother, examining a national campaign I had designed for a children's literacy organization, wiped away tears. "We missed so much," she said quietly. "All these years, we never really saw you." That evening, over dinner at my favorite restaurant, my father raised his glass in a toast. "To Coco," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who succeeded not because of our support, but in spite of our failure to provide it. We are so proud of you, daughter. Not for what you've achieved, though that is remarkable, but for who you are." It wasn't a magical cure for all of the hurt of the past, but it was a moment of genuine acknowledgement that meant more than any comparison or validation I had desperately sought in my younger years. The greatest lesson I learned through this painful journey was that my worth was never dependent on their recognition. The validation I had desperately sought from my parents could only come from within. By trying to measure up to their standards, to Jackson's accomplishments, I had been chasing an illusion that would never satisfy me. True fulfillment came not from external approval, but from living authentically, pursuing my passions with integrity, and creating work that reflected my unique vision. The people who truly mattered were those who saw and appreciated me for exactly who I was, not who I last wish I was. Today, my relationship with my family is different. More honest, with healthier boundaries. We are not perfect, and the scars of our past still surface, but we are learning to relate to each other as we truly are, rather than the roles we once played. Jackson and I maintain a cautious relationship. He has repaid about 20% of what he took, making monthly payments he has never missed. More importantly, he has kept his commitment to therapy and personal growth, gradually becoming someone I might one day fully trust again. As for me, I no longer define myself in relation to anyone else, especially not my brother. I am Coco Walker, a successful designer, a loyal friend, a woman who faced devastating betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. My worth is not measured by comparison, but by the integrity with which I live and the positive impact I create in the world. If you have ever felt like the lesser child in your family, if you have struggled to break free from unfair comparisons or to have your unique gifts recognized, I hope my story brings you comfort and courage. Your value does not depend on others' ability to see it. You are worthy of love and respect exactly as you are, not as someone else thinks you should be. What about you? Have you experienced similar family dynamics or had to redefine your self-worth beyond others' expectations? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear they are enough, just as they are. Thank you for listening, and remember, your unique path is valid and valuable, no matter who tries to tell you otherwise.